Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a time and place where the alleys twist like secrets, and the cobblestones seem to remember every whispered bargain. You're not walking past anything modern. No neon, no passwords, no taxi horns. Just a threadbare cloak around your shoulders, the faint sting of wood smoke in your nose, and the low creak of shutters closing for the night. You step softly, because in this part of the city, stories don't sleep. They curl up behind old tavern doors and wait to be overheard. A flicker of lantern light dances across the fogged window of a building that isn't a tavern, but it might as well be. There's laughter behind the walls, muffled, uneasy, edged with weariness. And outside, a crooked sign swings gently in the breeze. It's carved with something symbolic, maybe a flower, maybe a shoe, maybe just initials long forgotten. This is a brothel, but not the kind whispered about in scandalous novels. This one smells like wet wool and cabbage stew. This one is tired, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward, the soles of your shoes catching on the uneven stones. Every few feet, a figure hunches in a doorway, wrapped in fabric too thin for the chill. They're not calling to you, at least not loudly. In this part of town, the pitch is subtle. A glance, a nod, a silence that means follow me more than any words could. Brothels in medieval towns were often clustered along the edges, never far from trade routes, yet always tucked slightly out of view. You find yourself in one such fringe district. By day, it's filled with the clang of blacksmiths and fishwives shouting over salted cod. But by night, the tone softens. The women here aren't cloaked in mystery. They're cloaked in soot and survival. The building you enter creaks under its own history. Inside, it's smoky, dim, and warmer than the street. A hearth flickers in one corner. The floor is swept but stained with old wine. A cat with half a tail dozes in a wooden bowl once used for stew. You notice a girl, not more than 17, knitting a sock by the fire. She doesn't look up. That sock might be her third tonight. The madam, if you can call her that, nods in your direction. She's older than the others, dressed in practical wool, with keys hanging at her waist like a jailer. She doesn't smile. She doesn't need to. Her authority hums low like a kettle left too long. In medieval cities like London, Paris, or Lubeck, such houses operated with curious duality, openly acknowledged yet officially frowned upon. Towns often registered and taxed them, but also placed them near leper houses or tanneries, as though both profit and punishment needed proximity. Historians still argue whether this was economic pragmatism or moral containment. Probably both. You move through the common room, where laughter lifts briefly from the table. A woman is telling a joke about a clergyman and a goat, and nobody bothers to hush her. For a moment, it feels almost normal, not joyful, but human. There's warmth here. Also fleas. Lots of fleas. But you've survived worse. A parchment tacked to the wall catches your eye. It's a crude menu of services, not graphic, but coded. A jug of ale beside a name means something. A broomstick? Something else. You don't decode it. You're too busy marveling that someone took the time to draw it with ink and care. Even here, there's branding. One woman walks past you wearing a robe with bright green sleeves, brighter than the law permits. In some towns, women in the trade were required to wear distinctive clothing. Sumptuary laws enforced moral order through fabric. No fur, no silk, no buttons of silver, unless you were nobility. Of course, some flaunted those laws just to be noticed. As one chronicler wrote, "The hem tells more truth than the tongue." And then there's the bed. You're shown to one, not for use, but for cleaning. The straw is freshish. A dried orange peel hangs on a nail as a makeshift air freshener. No curtains. No privacy. No illusion. The women sleep here when there's no coin coming in. Sometimes they sleep in pairs, for warmth and safety. You feel a pang. You're not sure for whom. The walls are scrawled with names, hearts, and scratched out insults. A long-forgotten visitor has carved, "Maria was kind." Underneath, someone else added, "but also tired." You hear a story, whispered between two women as they share bread. It's about a nobleman who visited once, not to buy company, but to leave behind a bundle of firewood and 3 apples. "He was the loneliest man I've ever seen," one says. The other nods. "He cried when she sang." In places like these, songs are currency. A well-timed lullaby, a bawdy ballad, or a psalm softly hummed can change the mood of a room. In medieval brothels, music was both armor and invitation. Some women became known more for their singing than anything else. A few even performed in taverns under assumed names, flitting between shame and stardom in equal measure. You sit quietly by the hearth. The cat wakes, stretches, and relocates to your lap. You let it. The fire crackles. Another woman begins to braid her hair in the reflection of a cracked mirror. Her motions are slow, tender, the kind of care one offers themselves when no one else will. And that's the heart of this place. Not scandal, but survival. Not debauchery, but the dull ache of persistence. Historians still debate whether brothels were traps or sanctuaries. The answer, as always, depends on who you ask, and when. You close your eyes for a moment, lulled by the scratch of knitting needles, the purr of the cat, and the faint smell of rosemary left in the floor rushes to mask the mildew. Outside, the city hums in its sleep. You wake to the sound of bells, not church bells, but smaller, quicker ones, the kind sewn into the hem of a fool's cap, or tied to the door of a brothel so no one is surprised. You blink, adjusting to the gray light slipping in through warped shutters. Morning here doesn't smell like bread or flowers. It smells like cold ash, damp wool, and too many stories piled into one room. Someone is sweeping. Someone else is boiling water in a dented pot. The cat is gone. You rise, careful not to knock your head on the low beam above, and follow the creak of voices toward the main room. It's quieter now. The laughter from last night has been replaced with business. One woman is counting coins, slowly, carefully, placing each into a cracked wooden box. Another is mending a tear in her overdress, the needle flashing like a sliver of defiance. You take a seat in the corner as if you're meant to be invisible, and for the most part, you are. But your ears are open. That's when you hear it. A soft argument about taxes. It turns out brothels in some medieval towns were not only tolerated, they were regulated. In places like Toulouse, Hamburg, or certain quarters of London, sex work was openly taxed. Brothels had to pay rent, licensing fees, and sometimes even contribute to city infrastructure. In Avignon, under papal rule, they were officially registered, making the local church one of the more ironic landlords in European history. A woman named Bruna is fuming because the collector came early this week. He always comes early when the bishop's in town, she mutters, wiping her hands on her apron. Like the coins will absolve him faster. The others laugh, dryly. They've heard this before. Historians still argue whether this cooperation between church and brothel was deliberate hypocrisy or reluctant realism. It might have been both. In theory, the church opposed all forms of carnal sin. In practice, it recognized the difficulty of erasing it from the streets. So, some cities created a middle ground, a tightly controlled, openly acknowledged zone of sin, as long as it stayed in its corner. And yet, the boundaries were always blurring. You hear the story of a priest who used to come not for women, but to confess them. He would stand in the kitchen and listen as women recited their regrets between stirring the stew and fetching more candles. Some of them cried, some of them lied, and sometimes he cried too. Not all cities were so accepting. In Florence, sex work was criminalized and punished harshly. In Nuremberg, the punishments varied depending on whether the woman was married, single, or foreign. In Bruges, the laws changed almost monthly. One week, tolerance. The next, expulsion. You imagine trying to run a business under those rules, while also dodging disease, extortion, and social scorn. The broom handle thumps against your foot. It's a subtle message. Move. You step outside into the courtyard, where a bucket of water is being poured over a muddy threshold. Clean on Mondays, someone explains. Makes people feel like we're respectable. Respectability. It's a word that clings like damp wool. Back in the day, some brothels attempted it in the only way they could, by mimicking other businesses. They posted rules, hired guards, filed complaints with the city council when customers became violent or refused to pay. There are even surviving records of brothel owners suing for damages, lost income, or slander. One story goes that in 14th century London, a madam brought a case against a merchant who called her establishment a house of devils. She insisted her girls paid taxes, observed curfews, and kept the peace better than the tavern next door. The judge fined the merchant. Let them do their trade, he said. They pay more than you. You lean against a damp stone wall and watch the daily rhythm unfold. A vendor walks by, calling out for onions. A young boy runs past, laughing, oblivious. A nobleman's carriage trundles nearby, its wheels splashing mud onto your boots. He doesn't look your way. He's pretending he doesn't see the building. You're pretending not to notice that he stopped by last week. The tension between visibility and denial defines this whole world. Everyone knows. No one speaks, except in whispers. You return inside and notice the new notice pinned on the wall. It's from the city. A warning about a new morality patrol, funded by a visiting bishop. The women exchange glances. Again? Someone sighs. Another shrugs. They'll be bored after Easter. Some brothels used codes to stay ahead of these patrols. Lamps in the window meant open or closed. A red curtain pulled tight. Trouble. A cat on the step. Probably safe. These tiny signals, barely noticed by outsiders, became a language of survival. You're shown a small book kept by the madam, written in her own hand. It's not what you expect. No names, no prices, just symbols, initials, and quiet notes. One page reads, M returned, needs time. Another says, F sang again, better. It's more journal than ledger, and in that moment, it feels like proof. Proof that someone here sees these women as people, not just coin. You find yourself drawn to the stories that aren't written down. The girl who once dreamed of being a cook, the one who escaped a forced marriage, the one who chose this life not out of desperation, but because it gave her coin in her own pocket. Autonomy in any form was rare for women in the Middle Ages. Here, strange as it seems, some found it, however fleeting. Historians still debate whether medieval brothels empowered women or exploited them. As always, it depends on where you look and who you ask. But inside this smoky room, with its dented pots and worn wooden benches, the answer feels far more complicated than any lecture hall allows. You hear bells again, quieter this time, and then laughter. Someone just told a joke about a tax collector slipping on a turnip. You don't hear the punchline. The broom handle thumps again. Time to move on. You step back into the street, and this time it's midday. The fog has lifted, revealing a sky the color of pewter and a town in motion. Carters curse their wheels. Fishmongers shout over the stench of brine, and laundry flaps like flags between crooked wooden buildings. You walk without looking lost, because here, looking lost invites questions. Just ahead, is another building, slightly newer, slightly larger. This one has real signage, official even. A small wooden placard above the door reads something like, House of Rest and Regulation. It's not fooling anyone. This too is a brothel, but unlike the last, this one is licensed. You step through the door and immediately feel the difference. There's order here. Clean rushes on the floor, a ledger on a stand, a bored-looking clerk at a writing desk, idly sharpening a quill with a small knife. This isn't just a house. It's an institution. It has rules. In many medieval cities, prostitution was not only tolerated, it was administratively embedded. Governments, struggling to keep vice from spilling into the streets, created frameworks to control it. Brothels became registered spaces, subject to inspections and taxes. In return, their occupants received a strange sort of legal shield, so long as they followed the rules. You're handed a list, an actual printed list, by a woman wearing a brown apron and an expression carved from fatigue. It's not a menu. It's the house code. It outlines curfew hours, prohibited behaviors, required medical checks, though what passed as medical, then, is up for debate, and payment structures. No guests after midnight. No noise beyond second bell. Fines for fighting. It's bureaucratic, yes, but it's also oddly dignifying. In a world where women were often property, the fact that these women could collectively enforce house rules, however grim the context, meant something. You walk past the front room and into what looks like a dormitory. Beds are curtained, floors swept, a basin of water sits near the window. 2 women are folding linens, talking, teasing, yawning. You're told they chose this house over another because the food is better and the guards don't steal your shoes. That might not sound like a high bar, but here it's considered luxury. Cities like Dijon, Cologne, and Barcelona maintain such brothels with municipal oversight. Town councils approve them. Some even own the buildings. In one notable case, the city of Vienna owned and operated a public brothel that returned a portion of profits to the local poorhouse. That's right. Proceeds from state-sanctioned sin went directly into charity coffers. Historians still argue whether this was moral flexibility or financial necessity dressed in velvet. Not every woman here came by desperation. One explains that her family farm couldn't support all 7 children, so she came to the city looking for work. She tried weaving, but the pay was hopeless. Here, she says, at least she's warm and fed. And no spinning wheel, she adds with a smirk. You nod, not sure what to say. The truth is complex. Some of the women here were forced into this world by debt or abandonment. Others walked in of their own accord, calculating the cost. It wasn't a fair choice, but it was a choice. The clerk with the quill gestures toward a wall where a painted board lists the names of current workers. Not real names, of course. Names like Mistress Dove, Honey Elspeth, and Red Meg. They sound romantic. They're not. They're shields. Stage names existed even then, protecting the woman behind them from recognition, shame, or worse. A new client walks in, well-dressed, flushed from drink or nerves. He speaks briefly with the clerk and is shown to a back room. No one reacts. This is routine. The house operates like clockwork. You're told that some men, nobles, even clergy, prefer these regulated spaces because it reduces risk. No blackmail, no surprises, everything discreet, everything contained. That's the paradox of regulation. It protects the establishment, but doesn't always protect the people inside it. One woman, older than the rest, pulls you aside to show her ledger. Not the house's, her own. She keeps track of her regulars, what they talk about, how often they visit, what gifts they bring. She laughs when you raise an eyebrow. This is client management, she says. I'm not in love with them. I'm in business. She shows you one entry marked with a star, a widower who comes only to hold hands and cry. She never charges him full price. You linger near the kitchen, where the smell of lentils and garlic fills the air. A girl named Sila is stirring the pot. She's humming something old, a lullaby maybe. She tells you she was born in this very house, her mother a worker, her father unknown. Now she's 17 and thinking about leaving. Maybe I'll go sell ribbons, she says, although she has no idea where or to whom. There's a wistful defiance in her tone, the kind born from hearing too many stories and knowing too many endings. As you prepare to leave, the house mistress appears. She's sharp-eyed, iron-haired, and holding a ledger thicker than most Bibles. She says nothing, but nods in your direction. There's no hostility in it, just recognition. You've seen too much to be a stranger anymore. You exit into a street that seems different now, not cleaner, not kinder, but somehow more understandable. Every creak of a shutter, every thud of a boot feels like part of a system, a strange, flawed, deeply human system where people survive however they can. And you wonder if the church condemns it, but the city profits from it, if the people scorn it, but still visit, where exactly is the line between moral and manageable? You don't get an answer, but you do get a gust of wind that carries the scent of garlic, old candle wax, and the faintest trace of something softer, maybe lavender, or maybe hope. The wind turns colder as you continue through the twisting alleys of the lower quarter. This part of town has a different feel, less regulated, more worn. The buildings lean inward like old women whispering secrets across a narrow table. You're still close to the main market, but far enough that the bells of the cathedral feel more like memory than warning. You pause before a sagging doorway, its lintel barely higher than your shoulders. There's no sign, no candles, no cheerful symbols carved into the frame. But this is a brothel too. One of the unofficial ones, the kind that pops up in rented rooms, abandoned inns, or the upper floors of bakeries and bathhouses. You duck inside. It smells like barley porridge and damp cloth. The ceilings are low, and the fire smokes more than it burns. Still, the space is warm. 3 women sit near the hearth, all wearing loose dresses and woolen socks. One is darning a glove. Another is trying to teach a black and white dog how to sit. The third is counting coins, stopping every few seconds to scratch her neck. They don't look up when you enter. You're not important, and that's how they like it. This is life inside an unlicensed brothel, what some cities called free houses, though they were rarely free of cost. They operated outside the regulations, and that meant less oversight, fewer protections, and more uncertainty. But for some women, they also meant freedom. No curfews, no tax collectors, no list of approved colors to wear. Just rules made by the women themselves, enforced as best they could. One of them, brisk, sharp, probably no older than 30, tells you their only house rule: don't steal from each other. Don't bring drunks who won't leave. You ask who enforces it. She snorts. We do. In regulated houses, madams usually held the reins, but here, authority shifts. Sometimes it's the woman who owns the room. Sometimes it's the one who knows how to bribe the local watch. Sometimes it's whoever brought in the most coin last week. It's a constant dance. Part survival, part negotiation. Historians still debate whether these informal brothels offered women more autonomy or more danger. Official records often dismiss them as dens of vice, but that might say more about the record keepers than the people living inside. In truth, these houses were messy, fragile little ecosystems, equal parts tension and tenderness. You're offered a stool and a bowl of something that might be stew. It's mostly cabbage, but it's warm. One woman, wearing a tunic that's been mended more times than you can count, offers you a story with your meal. She used to work at a regulated house, she says, but the taxes kept going up. The rules got stricter, and the madam started charging rent on top of fees. She made us pay to boil water, she adds with a grimace. So she left. found a room, found others like her, built something smaller, cruder, but hers. There's no glamour here. You glance around and see bare walls, a slanted floor, and a corner where someone tried to patch a hole with bits of cloth and dried mud. But there's something else, too. Laughter. Not the tired, performative kind you heard earlier, but real chuckles. Quiet, sharp, and often sarcastic. A dog knocks over a cup. No one flinches. One of the women begins to sing. Not for show, just for herself. It's a low, humming tune. Something old. Perhaps even older than the building. You don't understand the words, but the feeling settles in your bones. You realize there's a kind of rhythm here. In regulated houses, the rhythm is imposed from above. Schedules, inspections, ledgers. In places like this, the rhythm is shared, improvised day by day. Who has the key tonight? Who will buy candles? Who's owed coin and who's lent it? Sometimes the rhythm breaks. A knock at the door silences the room. Everyone freezes. The glove drops. The dog growls. Then a voice. Only me. Relief. It's a friend, not trouble. A boy from the neighborhood, maybe 15, who brings fresh bread from the bakery next door. He's harmless, cheerful, and only asks for a story in return. Tonight he gets a tale about a knight who lost his pants chasing a goose. It's not historically accurate, but he laughs so hard he nearly drops the loaf. Even in places like this, children orbit. Not always their own, not always welcome, but part of the landscape nonetheless. You ask, quietly, how they deal with danger. The woman with the sharp eyes taps the fireplace poker. He's called Maurice, she says. You decide not to ask if she's joking. There's also mutual protection. If a man refuses to pay or gets violent, word spreads. Fast. Among the brothel network, even across cities, women kept mental lists of names and faces. One woman tells you about a man who was banned in Rouen, fled to Ghent, and was banned there too within days. He could lie faster than we could talk, she says. Sometimes these houses even helped each other, lent coin, shared herbs, took in a woman escaping a worse fate. The outside world often saw brothels as competitors, but inside, they were sometimes lifelines. You lean back on your stool and listen as the stew simmers, the dog snores, and the song continues. You catch a glimpse of the ceiling. It's low, patched with boards and straw, and someone scratched a sun into it. Just a crude circle with 8 crooked rays. Maybe it was meant to remind them of light. The fire dims. Someone tosses in another log. The shadows shift, but the warmth remains. And you sit there, quietly aware that you've stumbled into something few get to witness. Not scandal, not drama, not even history as it's usually told. Just women, surviving on their terms, making a home where no one thought one could exist. It's later now, the kind of late where even the taverns begin to murmur instead of roar. You've wandered into a quieter street, less muddy, more discreet. The houses here are taller, better built, some even with glass windows, though most are still patched with oiled cloth. You pause outside a door with an iron knocker shaped like a lion's head. There's no music, no voices, but something about the place feels rehearsed, like a stage waiting for the curtain. Inside, you're greeted not by noise or chaos, but by velvet, drapes of it, heavy and red, drawn across doorways, softening the sound of footsteps and fire. This brothel isn't for the common crowd. It's a house for men with coin, sometimes lots of it, and the women who know how to handle them. You sit quietly in a high-backed chair that smells faintly of cloves and smoke. The air is warm, and so is the wine someone places in your hand without asking. It's watered down, but comforting. The woman who offers it is dressed more richly than any you've seen so far. Deep green velvet, gold stitching at her collar, and a string of tiny bells woven into her hair. Her posture is practiced, her smile deliberate. You realize she's not just performing, she's trained. This is where appearance becomes survival. In many medieval brothels, particularly those serving nobles, merchants, or high-ranking clergy, presentation mattered just as much as anything else. The women here were expected to entertain, to read moods, to hold a conversation about local politics or imported wine. They weren't just sex workers. They were hosts, sometimes musicians, and occasionally spies. You notice her ring. It's tin, painted to look like silver, a trick of light and polish, much like the house itself. She tells you about the dressing room, which doubles as a sort of supply closet. Hair ribbons, perfume, more vinegar than rose, but still, scraps of fur trim, borrowed veils, most of it second-hand, some of it stolen, all of it curated for effect. Historians still argue about what these women actually wore. Some say sumptuary laws barred them from anything too fine. No fur, no jeweled clasps, no gold-threaded shoes. Others suggest that in certain cities, brothel workers were granted exceptions to stand out from married women. What's clear is that clothing became not just identity, but armor. A girl named Lena appears with a tiny mirror. She's dabbing something dark at the corners of her eyes. Charcoal mixed with pig fat. It makes them bigger, she says, like a doe's. You nod, pretending to understand, while she offers you the stub of a beeswax pencil to test it yourself. Even names here are crafted. Real names are whispered only in private, sometimes not at all. The rest are performances. Isolda, Mira, Celestina, names that sound noble, poetic, out of reach. One woman tells you hers used to be Brenna, but now she goes by Melisande. She says it with a sigh and a wink, as though admitting a fondness for the absurdity. The women in this house often deal with clients who expect not just company, but fantasy. They want to be admired, flattered, gently challenged. Some request songs. Others want palm readings, or to be told they're wise. You sit in on one of these sessions, just briefly. The man, round and ruddy-cheeked, is being serenaded by a girl playing a lute that's missing a string. He's smiling like a child, being read a bedtime story. It would be funny if it weren't so tender. These performances are practiced, learned, shared from one woman to the next. How to pour wine without spilling. How to laugh at jokes that aren't funny. How to remember whether Lord Ferris likes clove in his cider, and if he still limps from that old jousting injury. It's work, hard work, but it's also something more complex. In houses like these, some women earned enough coin to buy their freedom, or the freedom of someone else. A sister, a child, a debt-worn mother. One tells you her plan. 3 more months, then she'll leave. She's already spoken to a spice merchant who needs a translator. He thinks I'm Spanish, she says with a shrug. I'm not, but I know the words. Not every plan works, but some do. You're shown the costume chest, not for theatrics, well, not entirely, but for crafting the mood each man expects. There's a nun's habit, slightly singed, a merchant's cloak, and even a poorly patched crown. For the ones who want to feel like kings, someone mutters. A book lies on a side table, left, half open. You recognize the script, Latin, poorly copied. A psalter maybe, but inside, tucked between the pages, is a folded parchment with a painted flower. Delicate. Red. You don't ask who placed it there. You don't need to. The girl in green reappears. She sits beside you now, not smiling, just resting. She tells you about the scars, not all on skin. Some men come with stories of loss, she says. A dead wife, a child buried during winter, a betrayal by a friend or lord. And sometimes they just want to be heard. That's part of the service, too. Listening without judgment, offering warmth that doesn't demand explanation. She leans back and sighs. Sometimes I don't feel like a woman. I feel like a mirror. It stays with you, that line, because it's true for this whole house. Mirrors everywhere. reflecting what others want, offering back a shape, a sound, a feeling. The wine is gone. The lute has fallen silent. Outside, the moon has risen, pale and swollen, casting light across cobblestones and velvet curtains alike. You rise, thank the women, and step out once more. You don't say goodbye. It wouldn't fit. But you carry the scent of cloves and the sound of that lute with you, tucked somewhere between your ribs and your memory. Morning breaks differently in the poorer districts. It doesn't rise golden and triumphant. It leaks in, gray and grudging, through slats and soot-streaked windows. You're back in a rougher quarter now, near the tanneries. The air carries the sharp, sour sting of hides being soaked and scraped. There's a brothel here, too. Less a building and more a room above a cooper's workshop. The staircase groans under your weight, and you're pretty sure something alive just darted between the floorboards. Upstairs, the space is cramped. Blankets instead of doors. A fire in a rusted brazier trying its best. There's a shelf lined with clay pots, bundles of herbs hanging from a beam, and a faint, acrid smell you can't quite place. This is not a place for noble fantasies. This is where the body is blunt, survival is hourly, and medicine is homemade. A woman called Trudy is boiling something over the fire. The pot burps thick steam, and she waves it off with a cough. It's for the rash, she mutters, adding what looks suspiciously like crushed onion. Maybe. In the world of medieval brothels, disease was constant. Not just the feared ones, plague, pox, the French illness, but everything. Lice, scabies, infections from childbirth or untreated wounds. Women here became amateur apothecaries out of necessity. They learned from mothers, midwives, or traveling herbalists. They traded recipes, shared warnings, and sometimes made up cures just to feel like they had some control. On the shelf, you see a paste made from garlic and goose fat, another jar of powdered charcoal mixed with wine, and what might be dried frog skin. You don't ask. Historians still debate how effective these folk remedies were. Some worked. Willow bark for pain, honey as an antiseptic. Others were more aspirational. But in an age when licensed physicians barely treated women and religious hospitals turned them away for moral reasons, these concoctions were often the only option. Trudy shows you a scrap of parchment tucked in a jar. It's written in Latin, poorly, and features a recipe involving crushed emeralds. He said it would purify the blood, she says, shrugging. Didn't work, but the emerald was nice. That he was a doctor, apparently, one of the few who visited, either out of guilt, curiosity, or something less noble. He left her the recipe and a bill she never paid. You glance around and realize every woman here has their own methods. One carries a pouch of dried rosemary mixed with mint and vinegar, an attempt to ward off whatever might drift in from clients. Another chews cloves constantly. For the breath and the stomach, she says, mostly to keep from gagging. The brazier coughs again, and you're handed a mug of something steaming. It smells like broth. It tastes like regret. You sip it anyway. Trude begins talking about the bad winters, when fever ran through the house and women died quietly in corners, too tired to scream. There was no church burial, no headstone, just a pit dug behind the tannery and a mark scratched on the back wall, 2 slashes, and a circle. She lifts her sleeve to reveal a small scar. Pox didn't take me. Took my sister. She says it as if announcing the weather. In regulated houses, occasional medical inspections were supposed to protect workers from illness, but they were inconsistent at best, often rushed or corrupt. Unlicensed brothels like this one had no such pretense. If someone got sick, the others either nursed them or quietly pushed them out the door. One girl, barely old enough to be here, explains how she once wrapped a wound with boiled moss and goose feathers. It worked somehow, or at least didn't make it worse. And yet, even in this bleak landscape, there's gallows humor. True jokes about a time she tried to treat a cough with a concoction of mustard, eggs, and river mud. The cough stayed, she grins, but I got 3 days off. That's how most of the stories go. Something tragic, something absurd, and a laugh in between. You're led to a corner where a small table stands under a single tallow candle. There's a ledger, not for taxes or clients, but for remedies. Pages of spidery handwriting listing what was tried, what failed, what may be helped. It's science, in its most human, most desperate form. At the bottom of one page, someone has scrawled, hen's blood, plus nettles, plus prayer, nothing. Still, they keep trying. A visiting woman from another house arrives with a bag of dried nettle and powdered juniper. She trades it for vinegar and barley. These exchanges happen quietly, without coin. Knowledge is a currency of its own here. One woman pulls you aside and shows you her secret remedy, a concoction of boiled sage, lemon peel, and candle soot. She says it's for men who leave bad luck behind. You ask if it works. She grins. Not yet, but it smells better than they do. Historians still argue whether women in brothels were victims of ignorance or guardians of folk wisdom. The truth likely lies in between. They were not trained doctors, but they were observers, record keepers, survivors. Their remedies were born not of fantasy, but of watching what killed and what didn't. The fire sputters. Someone throws in a dried heel of bread to stoke it, and it hisses in protest. As you rise to leave, Trudy hands you a small cloth pouch. Wormwood and mint, she says, keeps the dreams soft. You thank her. You're not sure it will work, but that's never the point. Outside, the street is waking. A cart rattles by, its driver half asleep. A dog howls in the distance. You walk slower than before, the pouch warm in your hand, the scent faint but oddly comforting. You don't know if you believe in the cure, but you believe in the hands that mixed it. You drift from the edge of the tanneries toward the market lanes again. The sun is up now, but the air still clings to the chill of dawn. The city stirs louder here, vendors yelling prices, chickens escaping crates, and the clamor of carts jostling for space on cobbled roads. You follow the noise, not because it's pleasant, but because it leads you to a brothel that is, in every sense of the word, different. It looks like a merchant's home at first glance. Clean steps, a painted door, a polished brass knocker that glints like it's been wiped down just this morning. A woman in a fine cloak stands just inside, speaking softly to a man who smells of too much clove and confidence. He leaves with a grin and a wink, too proud to admit he was just here for comfort, not conquest. This is a place for arrangements. You're ushered in by a girl barely older than 20, but with the gait of someone who's crossed too many lines to be fooled again. She offers you wine, actual wine, not the watered-down kind, and gestures for you to sit near the fire. You're not here to see a brothel, in the usual sense. This is the home of kept women, those who've entered into exclusive agreements with specific men who pay not for a visit, but for a presence, a woman who is theirs in practice, if not on paper, for weeks, months, sometimes years. You hear them referred to as courtesans, companions, mistresses, but here they call themselves arranged. It's a subtle shift from survival to strategy. One woman leans against the window ledge, hair tied with a silk ribbon far too fine for her surroundings. She smiles at you, calm and deliberate. He sends letters when he's out of town, she says, mostly poems, bad ones, but it's nice to be missed. You smile, unsure what to say. She doesn't need your pity. She's not asking for it. In medieval cities, these kinds of arrangements weren't uncommon. Wealthy men, nobles, merchants, sometimes clergy, would form semi-official relationships with a single woman, often supporting her with a small home, a servant, and a stipend. It wasn't marriage, but it was close enough that everyone involved knew the rules. Sometimes it was discreet, sometimes it was scandalous, and sometimes it came with surprising terms. You're shown a parchment, part contract, part love letter. It outlines payments for clothing, a promise to visit at least once every fortnight, and a clause stating she must not see other friends. In return, she's to keep a well-ordered home, speak favorably of him in public, and refrain from starting any unnecessary quarrels. It's both sweet and absurd. Historians still debate whether these arrangements gave women power or merely another form of dependence. Some argue these women live better than many wives, free from household labor, controlling their income, and sometimes even learning to read. Others point out that the moment affection waned or fortune turned, they could be discarded without warning or recourse. But inside this house, the women talk about contracts like chess players. One woman, older than the rest, taps her ink-stained fingers against a leather-bound book. "You must read everything before you sign," she warns the younger girl beside her. "Even the things in Latin, especially the things in Latin." She speaks 5 languages. He pays her to translate letters from Spain. Another woman rolls her eyes. "Mine can't read," she says. "But he thinks I'm a noblewoman in hiding. I let him." The house smells faintly of wax and lavender. On the mantel, there's a bowl of ripe pears. Real ones. Not dried, not stewed, but fresh. A luxury. You're offered one, and as you bite into it, the sweetness stuns you. A girl named Mireille offers you a look at her wardrobe. It's modest, but every item has a story. "This chemise? He bought it after our first winter together. Said I shouldn't be cold while waiting." She folds it with care. "He snores like a goat and has 7 children in Rouen, but he brings oranges." There's no romance in her tone, but no hatred either, just memory. You're told that some of these arrangements begin with kindness and drift into something closer to companionship. Others begin with loneliness and drift into silence. Some end suddenly. Others last decades. One woman points to a brooch on her collar. "His wife gave me that," she says. "Said it was cheaper than divorce." You blink. She doesn't elaborate. The women here have their own rules, their own currency. A good client is dependable, respectful, not prone to jealousy. A bad one is the opposite. And an ideal one? Absent but generous. Someone jokes. Everyone laughs. The maid brings in stew. Actual stew, with meat and leeks and proper seasoning. You eat slowly, listening as stories unfold. One woman was a noble's ward before scandal exiled her. Another fled a convent. Another came here after her husband was accused of theft and hanged. "He didn't do it," she says softly, "but they needed someone to blame." She doesn't cry. She just keeps peeling apples for a pie no one really asked for. Historians sometimes try to romanticize these women, casting them as muses, temptresses, even proto-feminists. Others reduce them to side notes. But here, in this house with its soft cushions and sharp glances, you see something neither camp captures. Pragmatism wrapped in silk, steel hidden in perfume. A candle sputters. Rain taps the window. A new letter arrives, delivered by a page in livery far too fine for this neighborhood. One of the women opens it slowly, then sighs. "He's coming early," she says, "which means he's been drinking." No one responds. They all know what that means. Not violence, just work. She stands, adjusts her dress, tucks the letter into the folds of her bodice, and walks to the mirror. She smooths her hair with fingers that tremble slightly. Then she inhales, smiles, and walks downstairs. You don't see her again. The rain has settled into a steady rhythm now, drumming lightly on slate roofs and dripping from the eaves in long, slow beads. You wrap your cloak tighter as you pass beneath a timber archway and into yet another quarter of the city, this one louder somehow. There's music coming from a tavern up the lane. Not refined, not practiced. Just a lute missing a string and a drum played like it owes someone money. And over the music, there's laughter, raucous, unself-conscious, and distinctly foreign. You've reached the district where the Outlanders live. Every medieval city had one. A street, a block, or sometimes just a cluster of buildings where those from far-off lands gathered. Traders from the east, sailors from the south, pilgrims, mercenaries, merchants with coins bearing unfamiliar kings. And where foreign men gathered, foreign women often followed, or arrived first. The brothel here is smaller than most you've seen. It doesn't advertise. It doesn't need to. The windows glow faintly, and the smoke curling from the chimney smells not of pine or oak, but something spicy, maybe cinnamon or clove, or whatever scent lingers long enough to become a rumor. You step inside and are met by warmth, dense, perfumed, a little dizzying. The walls are hung with cloth, brightly dyed and patched with care. Low stools circle a central hearth, and the air is thick with incense. A woman in blue silk nods toward a cushion. She doesn't speak your language, not fluently anyway, but her eyes are kind and her presence commanding. Another woman, taller, wrapped in a patterned shawl, appears beside her, offering you something to drink. It tastes like warm wine and black pepper. You try not to cough. This is not your usual brothel. This is something more elusive. Part parlor, part safe house, part performance. The women here are travelers, immigrants, or survivors of wars that the locals only whisper about. Some were brought here as servants and stayed. Others fled and rebuilt. A few came by choice, drawn by opportunity or adventure. They are outsiders, twice removed from power, by gender and by origin. But here they've created something distinctly their own. One woman plucks at a stringed instrument shaped like a teardrop. Another is painting designs on a small square of silk, symbols perhaps, or prayers. A third is explaining, half in gesture, half in a soft, rolling accent, how to make rose water from petals, and patience. You hear laughter again, this time closer. A group of men are drinking by the fire. Sailors, maybe. Their boots are still wet. One tries to sing and fails spectacularly. No one minds. One of the women leans in and tells you, in quiet French, that these men are mostly harmless. Loud like donkeys, she says with a smile, but kind. They leave coin and sometimes oranges. In some towns, foreign women were treated with suspicion, accused of witchcraft, thievery, or seduction. In others, they were exoticized, fetishized, and feared in equal measure. Historians still argue whether these women were more vulnerable or more independent than their local counterparts. It depended, as always, on the place, the season, the mood of the street. But one thing is certain. They were talked about. You hear stories of Venetian dancers who arrived with traveling musicians and stayed for a decade, of North African women working in the ports of Marseille, sharing spices and stories, of Jewish women in Iberian towns offering both company and wisdom, sometimes to the same man, in the same hour. Not all these tales are kind. Some are laced with fear or envy, or worse, but they exist. In this house, though, no one seems to be trying to escape anything. They're simply here, cooking, singing, weaving stories in 4 different languages, while the dog sleeps by the hearth and the stew bubbles faintly in the corner. You're handed a piece of flatbread, warm and flaky. It's served with a dip made of crushed garlic and chickpeas. You bite into it and realize how little you've eaten today. Across the room, a man is attempting to dance. It isn't going well. A woman in a red sash begins to braid another's hair. They speak softly, in a language you don't recognize. But the tone is unmistakable, intimate, familiar, old as friendship itself. You sit back and take in the scene, the worn cushions, the chipped cups, the laughter that ebbs and flows like a tide. It's not perfect, but it's something close to peace, One of the women shows you a necklace made of tiny blue beads. Egyptian, she says. Or maybe not. I like the color. She doesn't need provenance. Beauty is enough. Another woman points to a map on the wall. It's hand-drawn, full of scribbles and corrections. It marks cities, rivers, mountains, places they've been or dreamed of. A tiny star marks this house. They don't expect to be remembered in official records, so they've made their own. A knock at the door interrupts the reverie. It's a messenger, young and out of breath. He delivers a wrapped parcel and scurries off. Inside, silk thread, a pouch of cardamom, and a folded note in clumsy handwriting. Is he learning your language? You ask. The woman shrugs. He's trying. That's worth more than you'd expect. You linger by the fire a moment longer, letting the warmth soak into your boots, your bones. Someone hands you a small clay pendant. You don't know the symbol on it, but the way she presses it into your palm feels like a blessing. Outside, the rain has stopped. The cobblestones are slick, but quiet. The lanterns flicker gold and pink in the puddles. You walk slowly, aware that you've just stepped out of a world that isn't built for permanence. It's built for the moment, for the hour, the song, the braided hair, the map with the tiny star, and you carry that moment with you, quietly, like a secret. You follow the edge of the market square now, boots echoing faintly under the cloisters of the old guild hall. The bustle is fading, replaced by the softer sounds of evening preparations, bakers banking their fires, children chasing chickens, and someone somewhere dragging a wooden chair across stone. And then you hear the footsteps, measured, purposeful, belonging to a man in an official-looking tunic carrying a long staff. He isn't in a hurry. He doesn't need to be. You've just crossed into the territory of the sumptuary patrol, the medieval fashion police, for lack of a better term. And if you're a woman in a certain trade, especially that trade, you're already on his list. Sumptuary laws weren't just about vanity. They were a tool for controlling visibility, morality, and class. These laws told people what they could or couldn't wear based on social status, profession, or reputation. For sex workers, that meant one thing. They had to look the part. No blending in, no silk, no gold trim, no pretending. You duck into a doorway just as the officer passes, pausing to scan the street with the same intensity someone might use to count apples. His eyes linger on a woman seated at a stall selling ribbons. Too much color in her hem, perhaps? He moves on. She exhales. In towns like Florence, Lyon, or York, sex workers were required to wear distinctive garments, sometimes yellow veils, sometimes striped cloaks. In some places, it was a rope belt or a patch sewn over the chest. The goal was clear: make them visible, make them shameful. You step into a house just beyond the square where a group of women are gathered around a mirror propped up on a barrel. One of them is carefully sewing red thread along the hem of her dress. Not because she wants to, but because if she doesn't, she'll be fined. Or worse. We call it the thread of shame, she mutters, but at least it's my stitching. That's the bitter edge of it. Even forced expression becomes eventually a form of craft. Another woman holds up a cloak, muddy, patched, but trimmed in green velvet. This got me chased last week, she says. Apparently green means hope, and hope's not on the approved list. They laugh, but it's thin. The house mistress, older, practical, missing 2 teeth, lays out a basket of accessories. Everything is drab, faded, secondhand. Pick what won't get you arrested, she says. Or don't. Depends how lucky you feel. Historians still debate the purpose of these laws. Were they moral boundaries or economic tools? Did they protect modesty or enforce hierarchy? The answer is, as usual, tangled in intent and convenience. One fact remains. Sumptuary laws didn't apply equally. Wealthy men could flaunt extravagance without fear, but a woman in a patched gown with gold-colored ribbon? That was scandal. You're shown a pair of shoes, carefully made, soft leather, delicate embroidery along the sides. "He gave me these," says the owner. "A merchant. Said I walked like I'd never had comfort. She only wears them inside now." Outside, they'd mark her as too proud for her station. Another girl holds up a mirror shard. "See this?" she asks, gesturing to her lips. "Rouge made from beetroot and vinegar. Illegal, technically." She smirks. "But I look less dead." That's part of the tragedy. These women often wanted to blend in, to wear the colors of wives or market sellers, to be left alone. But the law made that impossible. Visibility was punishment. Ornament was rebellion. You watch as one woman braids her hair, adding a string of tiny white shells. "They'll find me if they notice," she shrugs, "but they remind me of home." The shells clink as she moves, soft and defiant. A knock at the door halts everything. The women freeze, half-dressed, half-hopeful. It's not the patrol. It's just a friend returning from the dyer's with a bundle of cloth. Faded, safe, pre-approved. Still, the tension lingers. You sit by the hearth as they share stories. One woman fined for wearing too many layers, another forced to strip in public to prove her sleeves weren't silk, a third who wore nothing at all one day just to make a point. "They didn't know whether to arrest me or applaud," she says. There's a small book tucked in the hearth's edge, handwritten notes on which colors are being enforced this week, what the patrolman looks for, which magistrates are lenient. It's more detailed than most tax records. One woman recalls a trick, staining her skin with walnut oil to look sunburned and peasant-like. It worked, until a merchant recognized her by voice. "Next time," she says, "I'll fake a limp too." You hear the term scarlet shame tossed around, a nod to the notorious red fabric often associated with sin. But not all shame wore red. Some wore gray, or yellow, or no color at all. Shame was a moving target, depending on the day, the law, and who was watching. Historians often focus on what was worn, but rarely do they ask how it felt. To put on a dress not because you like it, but because it tells the world what they've already decided about you. As the night deepens, the patrol returns, this time on horseback, clattering down the lane like a warning bell. The women douse the lamps, whisper jokes about fashion nights, and retreat to the upper floor. You remain by the fire, watching shadows move across fabric stitched with care, worn with pride, and condemned by decree. When the hooves fade, the lights return. A girl hums as she smooths her skirts. The same skirts she'll have to explain, defend, and justify tomorrow. You think about your own clothes, your choices, your freedom to pick colors without consequence, and suddenly the threat of shame doesn't seem so distant. The next day begins not with birdsong but bells, low and deliberate. Not the kind that summon worshippers or announce market hours. These are slower, heavier, morning bells. You follow their sound to the edge of town, where stone gives way to weeds and gravel. There's a chapel here, small and old, its roof sagging and its windows patched with waxed paper. A few mourners huddle near the steps. One carries a bundle of wildflowers. Another just stands, hands folded, eyes down. And there, tucked beside the chapel, is a brothel. You blink. You check again. It's not hidden. Not quite. But neither is it announced. Just a doorway, a painted lintel, and the faint smell of incense mixed with beeswax and rosewater. You hesitate, unsure. But something pulls you inside. This brothel is quiet, sacred even. Not in a religious sense, though it sits beside a house of God. It's quiet because it wants to be, because the stories inside are heavier than most, and the voices softer. A woman sits by the window, embroidery in her lap. Her eyes flick up, then back down. She doesn't speak, but nods. You sit nearby, wordlessly invited. This place was built on a strange legend that once a bishop walked into a brothel to shame the women within, and walked out silent, shaken, and changed. He gave them food. He paid their debts. He came back every week, not for flesh, but for prayer. The chapel was built beside the house not long after. Historians still argue whether the story is true, whether the bishop was a man of faith or guilt, whether the women converted or simply negotiated a clever truce. But the building remains, and so does the ritual. Here, women work in silence half the day, and in prayer the other half. Not as penance, but as pattern. It's a rhythm, like sweeping or braiding hair, something steady in an unsteady world. A girl offers you bread, fresh, coarse, warm. She says little, but sits beside you and begins to tell the story of Madeline, the woman who once ran the house. Not a madam, not a saint, something in between. She was known for taking in women no one else would. The deaf, the disfigured, the broken-hearted. She taught them not to beg, but to read psalms. She kept a garden of herbs and never raised her voice. When she died, they say, half the town came to her funeral. On the mantel, there's a small wooden box filled with tokens, buttons, ribbons, a carved comb, a dried pear slice. Offerings? Memories? You don't ask. One woman wears a cross around her neck. Not gold, not silver, just wood polished by touch. She tells you she came here after a fire took her home. Not for work, just for shelter, and stayed. She's still not sure which part of her story qualifies as sin. A dog limps across the floor and curls at your feet. You reach down to scratch behind its ear, and it leans into your hand like it's never been touched kindly before. You ask about the chapel next door. They nod. The priest knows they're here. He leaves baskets of bread every Sunday morning. Never speaks. Never asks. Just leaves them on the threshold and returns to his prayers. Not all clergy were as kind. In many cities, the church condemned brothels as dens of vice, and yet collected taxes from them, sold indulgences to their patrons, even buried their workers in separate plots, unmarked, outside the consecrated ground. Historians still debate whether this was hypocrisy or simply the byproduct of a society unwilling to see its own contradictions. But here, the contradiction is tender, lived. You glance out the window and see an old woman lighting a candle in the chapel's alcove. She crosses herself, then steps quietly into the brothel's doorway and sets down a bundle of wool. No one questions it. No one speaks. You're shown a book, handmade, fraying, full of names, not clients, not debts, just names of women who lived here, worked here, died here. Some names are real, others are not. One entry reads only, "She sang lullabies even when no one asked." You ask to see Madeline's name. They smile. She never wrote it down. Outside, the bells ring again, soft now, fading. The mourners have dispersed. The wildflowers remain. You step back into the chapel, feeling the shift in air, cooler, still. The priest doesn't look up from his place near the altar. He doesn't need to. There's a single candle burning on the side table, its flame steady despite the draft. And beside it, a ribbon, bright red, tied loosely, as if someone meant to leave it and change their mind halfway through. You sit in the back row, watching the flicker of light against the stained stone. It's not redemption you feel, not judgment either, just stillness. A rare thing in the chaos of cities and coins and survival. And then you hear it, a woman's voice, low, behind you, humming a tune that sounds like rain against glass. You don't turn around. You just listen. You leave the chapel brothel behind as dusk gathers over the city like a woolen cloak. The streets are emptier now, but not quiet, never quiet. A dog barks somewhere far off. A baby wails behind a shuttered window. A drunken ballad lurches from a nearby tavern, followed by the unmistakable sound of someone falling off a stool. You walk uphill toward the older quarter of town, where buildings crowd each other like gossiping ants. Stone and timber here are worn smoother, darker. The corners are shadowed longer, and as you reach the crest of the lane, you see it. Two neighboring buildings. One is a monastery, the other a brothel, separated by a narrow alley and about 3 centuries of moral discomfort. The monastery door's closed, its carvings faded but still stern. You hear chanting from within, low, rhythmical, distant. A bell chimes the hour, and next door, through a crooked wooden door, someone laughs. You step inside the brothel. The contrast is immediate. Warmth, movement, the scent of bread baking and boots drying by the hearth. A cat blinks at you from the rafters, unimpressed. 2 women are dancing to a rhythm tapped out with spoons on a stool. It's joyful here, if a little chaotic. Monks still singing? A woman calls out. Bet they're on Psalm 22 by now. We're 2 verses ahead. Everyone laughs. This brothel and the monastery have been neighbors for decades, maybe longer. The proximity is both accidental and perfect. They share a well. They share a wall. They sometimes share silence. And, once in a while, more than that. One of the women, older, sharp-tongued, wearing a dress patched with deliberate flair, tells you that the wall separating the 2 buildings used to have a knothole near the top. They claimed it was for airflow, she says, but we saw more than air coming through. Historians still debate whether these arrangements were tolerated, hidden, or denied entirely by religious institutions. There are records of monasteries petitioning for the removal of nearby brothels, and others quietly buying candles from them. Reality, it seems, has always outpaced policy. A younger girl gestures for you to follow her upstairs. From the 2nd floor window, you can look directly into the monastery courtyard. A monk is sweeping. Another tends a small herb garden. They don't glance your way, but the windows have no shutters. They must know they're visible. We don't bother them, she says, but sometimes they send us bread or soup. One even gave me a psalm once, said it was for comfort. She doesn't explain what comfort she needed. Back downstairs, the brothel's cook, a stout woman with arms like cured ham, pours you a bowl of stew. Don't ask what's in it, she warns, but it won't kill you, probably. You eat anyway. It's salty, hot, and oddly reassuring. Someone's made a game board out of chalk and bits of bone. 3 women are arguing over rules while a 4th keeps score with bits of charcoal. It's not elegant, but it's life. You ask about the monks. One woman snorts. They're men, she says, sworn to silence, but never to blindness. Another nods. They pretend not to see us, but we hear their steps at night. We know who hesitates. The tension between the 2 buildings has worn grooves in both stone and memory. Once, a monk dropped a loaf of bread in the alley. A girl retrieved it, left a flower in its place. Neither spoke. Neither had to. Occasionally, the 2 sides meet formally. Once a year during Lent, the monks deliver baskets of ashes to the brothel. Symbolic, ceremonial, strange. The women use them to clean the hearth, or throw them at each other during particularly dull afternoons. And yet, there's no animosity here, just an understanding. Each serves something, though the definitions vary. You notice a small carved figure near the brothel's fireplace. A saint, maybe, or just a mother with a child. Someone's tucked dried rosemary behind it. Someone else has carved initials in the base. These things blur over time. Profane becomes sacred. Sacred becomes daily. One girl, barely out of girlhood, points to a doorway behind the stairs. Used to be a passage, she whispers. Walled up now, but I bet it still breathes. She's probably right. Old towns never really seal their secrets. You ask whether the monks ever complain? Once, the cook says. Years ago, said we made too much noise. And what did you do? You ask. We brought them stew, she replies, and sang Psalm 100 from the alley. They never complained again. It's hard to argue with hospitality and harmonies. As the fire burns lower and laughter softens, someone begins to hum. It's not a bawdy tune. It's not even merry. It's something you heard earlier, maybe drifting from the monastery. A hymn, low and simple, but here, on this side of the wall, it sounds like something else entirely. Not repentance, not rebellion, just recognition. You sit for a while, watching shadows stretch across the stone wall between the two houses. You realize it's not as high as it seemed. Nothing ever is, once you've seen both sides. The next house you visit doesn't announce itself with lanterns or laughter. There's no paint on the door, no name whispered in the alleys, but everyone knows where it is. You knock once and wait. No answer. Then twice. A woman opens the door just enough to see your face, then lets you in, without a word. This is not a place of song or perfume. It's a business. A well-oiled, tightly run operation. And it's run entirely by women. Inside, the mood is clinical. Clean floors, simple furnishings, a desk with a ledger, a basket of clean linens by the stairs. No frills, no fantasy, just function. The woman who runs it, called only the mistress, has gray hair pulled tight and eyes that miss nothing. She doesn't smile. She doesn't have to. You sense the room rearranges itself when she enters, the kind of authority forged by necessity, not desire. You watch as she moves through the house, checking rooms, counting coin, listening in without speaking. When she sits, it's only to do arithmetic, tallies, wages, debts owed, and debts paid. This isn't the largest brothel in the city, nor the richest, but it might be the safest, because this mistress, who was once a worker herself, understands the stakes. She negotiates with guards. She bribes city clerks. She keeps a small knife tucked in her boot, not for style, but history. Women like her appear again and again in the dusty corners of history, often unnamed, often undocumented, but unmistakably powerful. They kept order where there was none, protected those who could not be protected, balanced law, crime, and care with an instinct honed sharper than any blade. Historians still argue whether madams were protectors or profiteers, but the ones who lived it, who ran these houses like tiny kingdoms, rarely asked for such labels. They were too busy surviving, and helping others do the same. You ask the mistress, how many women work here? Depends who's angry with their husband this week, she replies without looking up. There's a dry humor here, a deep one. She shows you a set of small books. Ledgers, yes, but not just numbers. One records who's had bad dreams, another tracks who's gone missing and might be found. A third lists the names of guards who can be trusted and those who cannot. It's not just accounting, it's strategy. A knock at the back door interrupts your conversation. The mistress rises and gestures to one of the younger women. "The boy with bread," she says. "Don't let him see the hall." A moment later, warm loaves are stacked on the table. Payment, trade, bribe? You don't ask. You're invited to stay for supper, not as a guest, but as someone who's quiet and doesn't ask too many questions. You sit among women discussing inventory, candles, vinegar, thread, salve. It sounds more like a convent than a brothel. One girl rolls her eyes at the thought. If only the nuns had stew like this," she says, licking her spoon. "There are rules here, strict ones. No man enters without name and coin. No violence ever. No woman is forced to take a client she doesn't want. And above all, no one is left alone when sick. You pass a room where one woman lies bundled in furs. A younger girl sits beside her, quietly knitting, occasionally dabbing a cloth across the older woman's brow. "She'll be all right," she says. "Mistress says the fever is breaking. They have their own remedies here. Onion poultices, warm stone compresses, stories told through the night so no one has to sleep alone when scared. You wander through the halls and notice that every door has a mark beside it, etched into the wood. Not numbers, symbols, some of protection, others, names and code. The women here aren't anonymous, but they are shielded. The mistress once ran a different house, you learn, bigger, flashier, closer to the square, but too many city eyes, too many men who wanted control without offering protection. She walked away and built this one from the ground up, brick by brick, rule by rule. She doesn't believe in luck, only timing and preparedness. A woman named Lisa takes you upstairs, shows you the sewing room. They make most of their own clothes here, simple, sturdy, designed for work. But once a month, they make something beautiful. Just one piece, for themselves, not to wear for clients, just to remind themselves they still can. Tonight, it's a cloak with a velvet lining dyed with crushed elderberries. The color isn't quite purple, not quite blue, but it glows in the candlelight like something stolen from a dream. Lise runs her fingers over the hem and whispers, "We all need something soft." Before bed, there's a quiet meeting. Not mandatory, but most women attend. They sit in a circle, sharing news. A missing woman returned in the southern quarter, a client banned for cruelty, a new healer passing through with fresh herbs. They pass around a bottle of homemade cordial, tart, strong, one sip each, and for a moment it feels like family. As you leave, the mistress walks you to the door. She says nothing, just nods. You understand? Power comes in many forms. And here, in this house of strict rules and soft cloaks, it's worn like iron beneath linen. You find yourself drawn toward the river. Not the pleasant part, near the markets and the docks, but farther east, where the banks sag with mud and the water smells of smoke and forgotten things. There's a temporary camp set up along the shore, tents made from patched canvas, fire pits surrounded by broken stools, men in armor, half drunk, half awake, and women too. This is not a brothel in the city. This is the edge of an army. And these are the camp followers. The term sounds polite, clinical even, but it hides 1,000 stories, none of them clean. These women move with the soldiers, just beyond the battlefields, just behind the marches. They cook, they wash, they carry. And yes, many of them trade comfort for coin, food, or protection. It's a world where need outweighs rules. A woman named Brita offers you a seat near the fire. She's sharpening a knife. For rabbits, she says, or cowards. Depends on the day. She laughs, and you can't tell whether she's joking. Here, the brothel is not a house, but a tent, or a blanket on the ground, or just the shade of a cart. There are no licenses, no ledgers, no curtains, only coin. And risk. Camp followers have existed as long as armies have. Medieval chronicles mention them in passing, sometimes with pity, often with contempt. They were blamed for distraction, for disease, for sin, but they were also indispensable. Without them, armies starved, froze, and fell apart. Historians still argue whether these women were exploited or essential, likely both. But to the soldiers who lived on salted meat and damp straw, a warm voice and a cooked onion could mean the difference between misery and madness. Brita tells you she once followed a crusade, saw the sea for the first time, ate fish with spices, lost 2 fingers to frostbite. Would I go again? She asks, flexing her hand. Not a chance, unless they pay double. Another woman tosses a bundle of kindling on the fire and grumbles about bad boots. Her name's Tana, and she's been here longer than most of the men. She remembers 5 commanders. She remembers where the best river crossings are. She remembers which herb soothes a burn. She remembers who to avoid after the wine starts flowing. Tana doesn't call herself a prostitute. She doesn't call herself anything. I'm here, she says. That's enough. One girl, maybe 16, is patching a coat with twine and stubbornness. She doesn't speak much, keeps a rabbit's foot tied to her belt. Another woman explains that she followed her brother to war. He died last month. She stayed. No one questions it. There's an order to the camp, but it's enforced by those who live it. The women have rules. Don't approach drunk soldiers alone. Don't argue over a coin after dark. Don't get caught stealing from the officers. Share information. Share bread. Share needles. Look out for each other. They call it mud sisterhood. The name fits. You're invited to dinner, which is a generous word for boiled turnips, and something that might once have been pork. Still, it's hot. You eat it with thanks. Afterward, someone sings, a low, ragged tune, not cheerful, not sad, just persistent, like walking, or breathing, or surviving. A soldier stumbles past and slurs something crude. Brita throws a bone at his head. He curses but keeps walking. No one intervenes. The line between the women and the army is always shifting. Some officers tolerate them. Some despise them. Some exploit them. But few understand that the women, in their own way, are soldiers too, just not the kind who carry swords. One night, when the frost is thick and the fire low, a woman named Ellen shows you a small pouch of herbs. She explains how it soothes coughing, how it keeps wounds from festering, how it once stopped a fever in its tracks. But not always, she adds. Sometimes it just smells nice. She's lost 3 friends to illness, 1 to a knife, 1 to the cold, none to love. No one here talks about love. There are other losses too, quiet ones, women who vanish, who walk into the woods and don't return, who leave behind bundles of thread or names carved into tent poles. There's a corner of the camp marked by stones, not graves, exactly, just memories, flat rocks, burned wood, a ribbon nailed to a tree. One reads, H, laughed in her sleep. You crouch there for a long time. The fire sputters, a wind rises, the tents flap like sighs, and still the women move, tending to wounds, boiling water, checking the soles of their boots for rot. In the distance, the army drills for a battle that might come tomorrow, or not at all. The men train with swords and shields. The women? They train with everything else. The road back into town is littered with tracks, horse hooves, cartwheels, boot prints baked into dried mud. You follow them, not toward the markets or cathedrals, but down a smaller path that winds behind the city wall, where the buildings get sparser and the silence gets heavier. You reach a clearing with a single wooden post standing tall in the center. At its base lies a broken stool, scattered straw, and a rope, frayed but unmistakable. This is a place of punishment, and the people who spent their lives on the edge of respectability often found themselves standing in its center. The brothel nearby is shuttered, silent for the moment, its windows boarded, its door marked with a crude X, painted in pitch. Someone, likely a town official, has deemed it unfit, or sinful, or simply no longer profitable to ignore. Inside, the air is still. Dust covers the tables, a cold hearth, a cup tipped over, its contents long since dried. But in the corner you find a box. Inside, a coiled iron collar, a bundle of papers, and a pair of worn shoes. You don't have to be told what this place was, or what happened to the women who broke the rules. In many medieval towns, punishment for sex workers ranged from fines to brutal public shaming. Stocks, floggings, pillories, each meant not just to hurt, but to humiliate, especially for those who stepped outside the tightly drawn lines of legality. A woman caught working in an unlicensed house? Fined? Maybe flogged? A woman seen too many times with the wrong man? Public shaving of the head? A woman accused, rightly or wrongly, of theft or moral corruption? The iron collar. The chair. The chair wasn't just furniture. It was an instrument of shame. Placed in a busy square, It lifted the punished woman up for all to see. Sometimes it spun. Sometimes it was doused with water or rotten food. It was not justice. It was spectacle. Historians still argue whether these punishments were deterrents or performances. Most agree they were less about crime and more about control, about reminding women that their bodies were not theirs, not truly, not if the town disagreed. You leaf through the papers in the box, fines, names, a scrawled note that simply reads, "Sang in public again. No law broken. Just noise the wrong ears didn't want to hear." The silence in the house is thick, but not total. A creak, a breath. You turn and find a woman at the doorway. She doesn't flinch at your presence, just steps in, brushes dust from the counter, and sets down a basket. Inside, soap, candles, bread, not for the clients, for the women. She used to live here. Now she visits, whenever a house is shuttered, to leave small comforts for whoever remains behind. "Sometimes they come back," she says. "Sometimes not, but I don't want them to return to nothing." Her name is Mir. She walks with a limp and carries herself like someone who's had to argue with too many guards for too little. She offers you tea, cold, but spiced, and a story. There was a girl once, she says, caught loving another girl. Nothing scandalous. Just two hands held too long. A kiss seen by the wrong person. The magistrates didn't know what to do, so they labeled it public misbehavior and ordered her to sit in the chair. She did, silent, proud, hair tied back like a crown. No one threw anything that day. The brothel closed for a week, out of fear. But when it reopened, the girl returned. She cleaned floors. She sang again. And her song was louder than before. You sip your tea. Mir opens a small drawer in the back and shows you the collar. Not to frighten you, to explain. "See the inside?" she asks. You do. There are notches, tiny carvings, names, dates, words like faith, and no regret. "They turned their punishment into a message," she says. "Even when they were silenced, they wrote. Punishment was supposed to isolate, but here, it bound the women together. The ones who returned looked out for each other, helped cover fines, hid each other when the patrols came, kept one another from being dragged out barefoot in the snow. Outside, you hear a child's voice, then footsteps. A girl no older than 10 runs past the window, chasing a chicken with all the authority of a queen. Mir smiles. That one? She belongs to none of us, and all of us, she says. Her mother died in childbirth. We raised her." The girl rounds the corner again, laughing now, the chicken victorious. You glance back at the iron collar. It hasn't moved, but it feels lighter somehow. Punishment still lingers in this house, in the walls, in the floorboards, in the silence between words. But it's been made into something else. A warning, yes, but also a badge. A reminder that pain does not always mean defeat. You help Mir light a few candles before you leave. The flame flickers, casting shadows that look briefly like women standing tall, watching, waiting. You pass the punishment post on your way out, and someone has left flowers at its base. Wild, simple, just enough. No sign, no name, just remembrance. The road away from the punishment square takes you into the lower slopes of the city, where the soil turns softer and the fences lean inward like tired old men. You pass vegetable patches, a goat tied loosely to a fence post, and laundry swaying on sagging ropes. Here at the fringe the world slows down, and so do the stories. Beyond a crooked gate tucked beneath the shade of an old chestnut tree is a burial ground. But not the kind with marble markers or holy blessings. These are low mounds, some with wooden crosses, many with nothing at all. A few bare symbols carved into stone, combs, flowers, shoes, or simply initials. This is where they buried the fallen women. You kneel beside a grave marked only by a carved heart. It's tilted, weathered, but someone has left a braid of dried herbs atop it, lavender, rosemary, and something unfamiliar. There's a house nearby, simple, small, smoke rising faintly from the chimney. You approach slowly. A woman in a blue apron stands at the door. She's older, solid, with soft hands and sharp eyes. "You're looking for the stories," she says before you speak. You nod. She sighs, steps aside, and lets you in. Inside, the house is warm, smells of bread and candle wax. There are no silk gowns here, no painted lips or practiced smiles, just memory, tucked into every drawer and hanging on every wall. She's known as Sister Marin. Not a nun, not officially, but once a woman of the trade herself. Now she watches over those who didn't survive it. She tends the graves, writes the names, lights a candle every week for the unmarked ones. There are always more unmarked ones, she murmurs. On a low shelf you see a bundle of ribbons, each labeled in neat handwriting. One reads, Lene, sang off key but always tried. Another, Bela, braided hair even in the rain. A third simply, K, laughed when no one else could. Marin doesn't dwell on cause. Some died from fever, some from childbirth, others from knives, fists, loneliness, or silence. All of them, she says, deserved a name. Historians often forget these women. If they appear at all, it's as statistics or warnings. Rarely are they honored, rarely are they remembered, but here they are. You ask about the carved symbols on the stones. They're what the women asked for, she explains. We couldn't afford headstones, but we could carve something. A comb for vanity, a rose for gentleness, a star for someone who liked to look at the sky. She shows you a journal, weathered and bound in leather. Inside are names, dates, and brief stories. Not confessions, just memories. One entry reads, Isla wanted to be a painter, never got far, but her sketches were in every room, even the outhouse. Another, Marit, kept sweets hidden under the floorboard, shared them with the sick ones. You flip gently through the pages, struck by the intimacy. There's no shame in these stories, no moral lectures, just the quiet assertion that these lives mattered, that they mattered. Marin lights a candle and places it by the window, a weekly ritual. If someone's looking for them, she says, they'll see the flame. You step outside to the graveyard once more. The earth is uneven, the markers humble, but there's care here. Each grave has been weeded, even the ones with no name. A small figure approaches, a girl with an apron too large for her frame. She's carrying a wooden comb. She kneels at one of the newer mounds and presses it gently into the soil. She brushed my hair every morning, the girl whispers, even when she was tired. You don't ask who. The grave says enough. In the distance, bells ring, but not the harsh clang of judgment. These are softer. A chapel, perhaps, or a monastery, or maybe someone tolling a pot to call in the chickens. You return to Marin's house for tea. She pours 2 cups, sets one in front of you, and asks if you'd like to read more. You do. Hours pass like clouds. You read about women who painted walls with crushed berries, who smuggled cats into houses that banned them, who kept journals hidden under floorboards and tucked coins into the shoes of newer girls, just in case. You read about love, not the kind sold or borrowed, but real love, between women, between friends, sometimes between a girl and her dreams. One passage stands out. They said she fell. Maybe she did, but I remember her standing, taller than anyone else, hair braided like a crown. She told me the stars would forgive us, even if no one else did. When you rise to leave, Marin hands you a piece of cloth. It's old, worn, embroidered with the image of a crescent moon. She liked to watch it rise, she says, said it made her feel seen. You carry it with both hands. Outside, the sky is turning that same dusky silver. The graveyard shimmers under the twilight, soft and patient. You walk slowly past the heart-shaped stone, past the ones with no names, past the combs, the shoes, the carved suns. You don't say goodbye. You don't need to. You were never just passing through. You wander back toward the heart of the city just as the lanterns are being lit. Each flame flickers to life with a practiced gesture, one by one, illuminating doorways, street corners, and the faces of those lingering in twilight. This is the hour when the lines blur, between day and night, between law and indulgence, between who's walking home and who's waiting by a shuttered window. You step into a square you haven't seen before, smaller than the marketplace, but busier than expected. Laughter echoes across cobblestones, and the smell of roasted chestnuts mixes with the sharper tang of ale and wet wool. On one corner, a fiddler plays with enough enthusiasm to keep time moving. On another, a man is bargaining with a baker while trying to balance a goose under one arm. And there, tucked in beside the lamplighter's post, is a familiar kind of door. A brothel, not grand, not hidden, just there, one of many. But this one has something the others don't. A line, not long, but varied. A young scribe with ink on his sleeves, a middle-aged man with a fur-trimmed coat, a cobbler's apprentice clutching a single coin so tightly you can see the imprint on his palm, and, trailing just behind, a knight, or at least someone dressed as one, mumbling into his collar. Inside, it's warmer than it should be. Candles smoke near the ceiling. A dog dozes beside a fire. A woman with a tired face and mischievous eyes takes payment with one hand and offers bread with the other. Busy night, yes? Yoro and always is. After payday and funerals, she replies. You stay back, watch how the evening unfolds. One by one, the men are greeted, seated, spoken to, not seduced, but seen. Some talk too fast, some barely speak at all. One just stares into the fire. This brothel welcomes all sorts. Rich, poor, young, old, drunk, grieving, guilty. And the women here? They read them like books. A girl named Yvette explains it simply. Some want touch. Some want silence. Some just need to remember they're not invisible. The coin exchange varies widely. Gold for some, copper for others, eggs on occasion, once a chicken. That was a good chicken, Yvette says. Laid eggs through winter. The hierarchy of clients is not what you'd expect. The nobleman who pays in silver leaves no impression. The apprentice who brings a story, or a song, or fresh cheese from the village, he's remembered. You sit beside the hearth and listen as the women talk during their breaks. About clients. About tricks of the trade. Not that trade, but the trade of understanding people. One asked if I knew Latin, one woman says. I told him I knew what silence meant in every language. They laugh. There's a chart of sorts scratched into the back of a cupboard. No names, just signs. A feather for someone gentle, a dagger for someone rough, a crown for someone who tips well, a snail for someone who takes too long. Everyone has a symbol. You notice that the same client can be both feather and snail. Historians rarely speak of these relationships in personal terms. They reduce them to numbers, average earnings, standard fees, client frequency. But these women remember who came in crying, who asked about the stars, who left a poem tucked into a shoe. One client brings gifts, always the same, a bit of honeycomb wrapped in cloth. He says nothing, just places it on the table and waits. He never stays long. No one knows his name, but every woman has tasted his honey. There's a small drawer under the counter labeled Keeps. Inside are tokens from clients, some strange, some sweet. A button, a feather, a dried plum, a tiny silver bell. Nothing valuable, everything remembered. Yvette pulls out a folded scrap of parchment. This one wrote a riddle, she says. Still don't know the answer, but I like that he thought I could. The night wears on. The fire dips lower. One man falls asleep in a chair. No one wakes him. He'll be nudged gently. Come morning. Another leaves, crying. No one mocks him. The cobbler's apprentice gives away his only coin. In return, he gets tea, a song, and a place to sit where no one tells him to hurry up. You ask Yvette how she remembers so many faces. Because no one else does, she says simply. She leads you to a side room, small and dusty. The walls are covered in charcoal drawings, some crude, some intricate. Faces, mostly, some with names, others just outlines. A boy with freckles, a man with crooked teeth, a girl with a scar and laughter in her eyes. Clients, workers, lost friends, maybe even someone still walking these streets. It's their version of memory. No grand tombs, no family crests, just the echo of a moment when someone saw you, held your hand, called you by name. You step back into the main room. The women are sweeping, wiping tables, banking the fire. The clients are gone. The laughter has faded, but the warmth remains. Someone tucks a blanket over the man still sleeping. Someone else sets aside a heel of bread for the morning. As you leave, you glance at the chalkboard near the door. A new symbol's been added. A lantern. No one explains what it means, but somehow you understand. The sky is velvet now, deep, dark, stitched with stars. You walk slowly through quieter streets, past shuttered shops and sleeping animals curled in doorways. But the city isn't fully asleep. Not yet. You hear movement, soft, scattered, like whispers behind walls. And then a sudden noise, a crash, a shout, and a sharp intake of breath. You turn down a side alley. It's narrow, brick-lined, damp with the scent of ale and fear. Two figures argue near a doorway. One stumbles backward, holding a split lip. The other stands still, fists clenched, breathing hard. The woman watching from the window above doesn't scream. She doesn't rush down. She just notes it. And within moments, others do too. The brothel on this street doesn't have a name, but it has eyes. You slip inside as things calm, as the man slinks off and the woman, barely more than a girl, sits on a stool cradling her cheek. Someone presses a cloth to her skin. Another brings broth. No one asks what happened. They already know. This is a house where justice is local, street level, woman-led. Street justice, they call it. But it's not chaos. It's organized, whispered, passed along in looks and signals and small decisions. This client won't be served again. That man's name will be passed to the other houses. Someone saw. Someone always sees. Here, reputations matter. Not just the women's, but the clients. How they behave, what they say, how they leave. You're shown a small book tucked beneath a floorboard. It's not a diary. It's a ledger of consequences. Names, events, codes. A page marked with a crude drawing of a boot next to the words, "Kicked Elsa, do not open door." Another with a heart and cried after wife's funeral. Treated everyone kindly. Give bread. There is no law here, not really. The city's courts rarely touch this world unless coin or scandal forces their hand. But inside the brothels, justice operates differently, silently, swiftly. Historians don't talk much about this. There are no official records of slaps returned or blankets shared, but these quiet systems, the warnings passed, the stories whispered over stew, were as real as any judge's gavel. A woman named Anka sits beside you and explains how it works. We don't wait for protection, she says. We build it. She tells you how, once, a client hurt a girl. Badly. Too badly for bruises to fade quickly. He tried to come back weeks later, but every house refused him. Every inn turned him away. Someone carved a mark into his door. He left town within the month, she says. Sometimes justice is exile, other times it's mercy. Anka recalls a man who arrived trembling, coat inside out, speaking nonsense. A war veteran likely, scared of loud noises, forgot where he was. We didn't charge him, she says. We gave him a bath and a lullaby. There's a woman named Ro who carries a stick, not for show. She trains the younger ones in how to say no, how to push back, how to make a loud sound when needed. We're not violent, she says, but we're also not prey. One girl, barefoot, hair in braids, tells you about her first week here. I thought I had to let anything happen, she says, but Anka taught me how to say, you can leave now, and mean it. You sit with them as they drink strong tea and stronger wine, talking not about pain, but about boundaries, what they'll allow, what they won't. One woman holds up a necklace made of copper beads. He gave me this, she says. After I forgave him, she pauses. He never came back, but he said he wanted to say sorry. That was enough. Forgiveness here is not assumed, it's earned. There's a soft knock at the door. A boy, no older than 12, delivers a package. Soap, dried fruit, and a note. Ro reads it silently, smiles, and tucks it into her apron. From a baker, she explains. We made sure his sister got home safe during the winter floods. He never forgot. You realize that justice here isn't just about punishment. It's about memory, about knowing who helped, who harmed, and who stood by and did nothing. You ask if they ever call the guards. Sometimes, Anka says, but not if we want results. You think about that for a long moment. In the corner of the room sits a chest, scarred, old, locked. Inside, they keep the hardest stories, the ones they don't say aloud, but won't forget. Each marked with a small drawing, a crow, a rain cloud, a cracked mirror. So we remember the patterns, Ro explains, so it doesn't happen twice. The city sleeps while this house watches. Behind every candle is someone alert. Behind every laugh, someone listening. Behind every curtain, a story waiting for its ending. And sometimes the women get to write the ending themselves. As you prepare to leave, a new girl walks through the door, shivering, lost. Someone puts a blanket around her. Someone else offers tea. No one asks her story. Not yet. They'll listen when she's ready. Out on the street again, the night feels different. Not quieter, but aware. As if somewhere, in a dozen rooms, women are watching, recording, remembering, and not forgetting. You pass a stone wall marked faintly with chalk, a feather in a circle, a message, a warning, a promise. You don't know what it means, but someone will. The moon is high now, casting its pale light across rooftops and chimneys, making everything look colder than it is. You cross back into the merchant's quarter, where the cobblestones are tighter, the shutters painted, and the brothels quieter, not because there are fewer, but because they hide better. But not all hiding is escape. You reach a small building nestled between a candlemaker and a tailor. Its sign has long since faded. No one advertises here. Inside, the light is soft, the air scented faintly with beeswax and lavender. You're not greeted with laughter or perfume, but with the low scratching of a pen on parchment. This is the house of leaving. Here, the women aren't working. They're preparing to stop. The woman who runs it is named Dana. Not madam, not mistress. Just Dana. She moves with quiet precision, hair pinned tight, sleeves rolled, ink stains on her fingers. She doesn't smile much, but she does look you in the eye. That's rare in this world. She shows you around, 3 rooms upstairs, each with a bed, a chest, and a sewing kit. One of the women is mending boots. Another is practicing letters on a wax tablet. A third is asleep, finally, safely, deeply. This house is for transitions, Dana explains. For those trying to get out. Or Figure out what's next. There are rules, of course. No clients, no coin exchanged, no obligations beyond cleaning, cooking, and quiet. Historians rarely mention houses like this because they rarely lasted long, or they didn't register with the city, or they were simply never noticed. But they existed in pockets, in corners, in the hearts of women who remembered what it was like to have no place left to go. Dana started this one after leaving the trade herself. She saved coin, bartered favors, and made a deal with a bookseller who owed her too many things. He gave her the building. She gave it purpose. Downstairs, there's a ledger of a different kind. It doesn't track clients. It tracks skills. Sia, cooking. Kasha, spinning wool. Mira, reading at basic level. May, knows herbs, can recite psalms. Each woman writes her name when she's ready, beside the things she hopes will carry her forward. You sit in the corner as they eat. Lentils, carrots, thick bread. One of the girls shares a joke about a bishop and a goose. It's terrible. Everyone laughs anyway. The quiet kind of laughter, where relief has just barely started to creep in. Dana shows you the second room, smaller, filled with baskets of cloth and thread. They start with mending, she says. Then new pieces. We sell to a shop in the square. They don't ask where it comes from. We don't tell. One girl holds up a half-finished tunic. It's uneven, but hopeful. For a baby, she says softly. Don't know whose yet. Just want to be ready. Another is braiding dried herbs to sell in bundles. For stew, or charms, or both. She shrugs. They're not quite sure where they're going, but they've stopped looking over their shoulders, and that, here, is progress. Dana opens a drawer and reveals a small pouch. Inside, 10 coins, carefully counted, wrapped in wool. Emergency fund, she says, for the one who needs to run without warning. No questions asked. You notice a wall with letters pinned to it, some new, some old, some water-stained and barely legible. Letters from girls who made it, Dana explains. Sent back with coin, or recipes, or just thanks. One reads, Dana, I got work in the Abbey's kitchen. It's hot and boring. I love it. Tell Marin her embroidery got me noticed. Send in coin soon. Also, I still hate carrots. Another. The boat came. I left. The sea was awful. But the city here is clean and I'm singing again. Thank you for not laughing when I said I missed music. I thought that part of me was gone. The wax tablet you saw earlier, it's covered in the alphabet. A girl tracing each letter with her finger. She says her name is Nayla. She wants to be a healer. Or at least learn what doesn't kill people. She says. Dana hands her a book. Simple, handwritten, full of plant drawings. Nell hugs it to her chest like it might vanish. There's a shelf here with odd items. Not tokens exactly. More like markers of survival. A wooden spoon. A thimble. A cracked bit of mirror. All things left behind by women who pass through to remind the next ones. You are not alone. You hear footsteps outside. Dana tenses, just for a second, then relaxes. It's only the baker's boy, dropping off flour. Paid in advance. Trusted. Not everyone who leaves this house stays gone. Some return, not to work, but to visit. To donate bread. To bring herbs. To tell stories. They come back because they remember what it's like to be told. You can rest here. You ask Dana what she tells the girls when they arrive. Nothing, she says. I listen. First. As the night deepens, they gather around the fire. One girl reads aloud from a storybook, a tale about a fox who wants to dance. No one interrupts. No one laughs. It's not about the fox. It's about being allowed to imagine again. You leave quietly, the firelight warming your back as you step into the cold. Behind you, a girl begins humming a tune. Not a song of work or of longing, a song of beginnings. The night has thinned into its quietest hour. Even the dogs have stopped barking. You walk through fog now, soft and creeping, and the city feels dreamlike, like you've stepped sideways into some in-between world where everything echoes a little softer. You pass a narrow alley and pause. A door is open. Inside, candlelight flickers against bookshelves, real ones, packed tight with mismatched volumes. Maps line the walls. A tapestry hangs low over one window, depicting a woman riding a lion. You step through the threshold, drawn by warmth and by curiosity. This isn't a brothel, not anymore. It's a place of stories. The woman who greets you is older, gentle-voiced, and entirely unbothered by your surprise. Her name is Bruni. She wears a dress of heavy wool and spectacles mended with twine. "You're late," she says, not unkindly. "They've already started." In the corner of the room, a small group sits cross-legged on cushions. 5 women, 2 men, 1 child fast asleep under a cloak. A candle sits in the center, flickering slightly with each breath. A woman is reading from a scroll, not ancient, just old, and stained with wine. And when he asked why she had embroidered a sunflower into his collar, she said, "So, you don't forget where the warmth comes from." Everyone chuckles, then exhales. Someone adds, "That's what Lida used to say when she baked those horrible little pies." This place, you realize, is an oral archive, a gathering ground for the memory of the forgotten. Not an official hall of history, but something stranger, truer. Bruni calls it the Whisper Room. Each week, or when the fog is just right, people gather here to share stories, not of kings or wars, but of women who danced, bled, stitched, sang, hid, fed, taught, survived. Many of them were sex workers, many of them were not, but all of them lived on the margins. And here, in this room, they're centered. Bruni hands you a parchment, written in 5 hands. Etta told fortunes with a deck of flower petals, got them wrong, got them beautifully wrong. Sarah sang lullabies to herself while mending socks, claimed she remembered her own birth. No one argued. Joan fought off a thief with a broom, then fed him bread when he started crying. You read slowly. These aren't legends. They're lives. Messy, half-remembered, softened by the warmth of time and retelling. Historians sometimes dismiss stories like these. Anecdotal, unverifiable, folkloric. But that's the point. These aren't data points. They're the soul of a people who weren't invited to leave records in stone. One woman begins telling a story about her grandmother, who ran a riverside brothel and once smuggled a piglet out of the bishop's cellar under her skirts. Everyone gasps. Everyone laughs. The mood lightens. Then someone else tells a story about a woman who never spoke above a whisper, who stitched tiny messages into the hems of her dresses. She said it made her feel like her words could survive storms. The others nod. No one asks if it's true. It's real. That's different. In the far corner, someone is sketching. A boy, no older than 15. He's capturing faces, one from memory, one from a story just told, one from his own imagining. They blur together. You see one with a braid, one with a scar, one with a gaze that could unlace silence. The Whisper Room isn't just stories. It's art. It's tea brewed over low fires. It's hands learning how to make paper, how to copy letters, how to fold maps. One woman teaches how to bind a book. Another teaches how to bind a wound. There's a wall here. Simple stone, warmed by candlelight, covered in phrases written in charcoal. She once made stew out of moss and laughter. He cried when she called him kind. The silence after her name was louder than bells. You stand there for a long time, reading. Bruni returns with 2 cups of warm wine. You sip in silence. She tells you this house used to be a brothel, not famous, not elegant, but full, of women, of life, of music. When it was shut down, she bought it. With what money, she doesn't say, but she kept the bones, the stories, and the promise that no voice here would be lost again. Now the rooms are filled not with transactions, but with memory. Before you go, you're invited to add something to the wall. A name, a phrase, a drawing, anything. You hesitate. Then, with trembling fingers, you write, "She laughed even when she wasn't expected to." Bruni reads it. She smiles. "She'd be welcome here," she says. And somehow, you believe it. The fog is lifting now, just a little, enough for outlines to return, chimneys, balconies, the uneven silhouette of a city exhaling in sleep. You walk slower. Your legs ache, but your thoughts ache more. You've carried a dozen lives with you tonight, maybe more. And still, they keep whispering. You pass an old gate, half rotted, where ivy has nearly hidden a carved crest. You don't recognize the symbol. A flower? A flame? You make a note to ask, then forget the moment you hear the laughter. Not the kind from taverns, not loud, just a chuckle, warm and close. You follow it around the bend and find yourself in a tiny courtyard. The brothel here has no walls, just an open space, a fire pit, and 4 women sitting on a bench made from an upturned cart. You think maybe it's not a brothel at all. Maybe it's what happens after a brothel, after the clients leave, after the curtains fall, after the rules have been bent so many times they simply lie down and sleep. They look up when you approach. "You're late," one says. Another adds, "Not for anything in particular, just in general." You sit. They're not working anymore. Not tonight. Maybe not ever again. They don't say. They just speak of things rarely spoken, what the future might look like, who they used to be before names became currency, whether they'd like to live near trees. "I used to dream about a bakery," one woman says, "with bees outside the window and flour on the floor." "Why bees?" someone asks. "Because they stay busy," she answers. "And they sting when they must." They nod. It makes sense. Another woman mentions she once wrote poems. "Mostly about goats," she admits. "There was a metaphor. I forget it now." They laugh. Not bitterly, just easily, as if they've finally stopped waiting for the right to do so. One tells a story about a man who brought her plums each spring. He said they reminded him of childhood. She shrugs. "He never touched me, just sat, talked, cried, then left." "Did he come back?" "No, but I planted a plum tree behind the house." You ask what the tree looks like now? "Small," she says, "but trying." The fire crackles. Someone throws in a twist of dried orange peel. It smells briefly like winter markets and mulling wine. They begin talking about names, not the ones they used, the ones they chose later, the ones no one knew. "I called myself Sparrow once," says one, "because I was always watching." "I liked violet," another says. "Not the flower, the color." "Mine was rope," the third says, "because I was tired of being held by it." No one blinks at that. And the fourth woman? She just smiles. "I didn't pick one," she says, "but I answer to all of them." You sit in the warmth, this strange peace with no rules, and listen as the wind shifts slightly. A bell rings somewhere far off. Not church, not warning. Just a reminder that time keeps moving, even when we sit still. One woman begins to sing, a soft, wind-in tune, half lullaby, half memory. You don't know the words. No one does. But everyone hums along. This moment, fragile as thread, will not last. But tonight, it's enough. A place without shame, a space without cost, a breath without apology. And when you finally stand to leave, they don't stop you. They don't ask your name. They just nod, as if to say, "You'll carry us, won't you?" And you will. Because these stories, aren't for forgetting. They're for holding. They're for whispering to others when the night is long and the lights are low. They're for repeating until someone believes them. The city quiets now. Truly. The bells are silent. The shutters are closed. The last fires turn to embers. You walk slowly through empty streets, breath rising in soft clouds, footsteps softened by worn stone and still air. The world no longer feels sharp, just blurred, gentle, wrapped in the hush of a place that has said too much and now must sleep. The women are still there, in the alleyways, the ledgers, the braids, the herbs tucked under floorboards, in the candles and the laughter in the graveyards just beyond the walls. Not gone, not erased, just quieter now. And maybe, as you lay your head down tonight, you'll remember them, not for the roles they were given, but for the lives they shaped, the songs they hummed, the fire they carried in rooms that asked only for their silence. You close your eyes and breathe deeper, slower. There is no judgment here, only rest. The city dreams beside you, and the stories drift like leaves across water. You do not need to hold them all, just one, just long enough, to remind someone else that it mattered, that they mattered. Sleep now, the lamps are low, and the whispering has stopped. Just for a while, sweet dreams.